Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Nukes of Hazard. I'm Sarah Bradley.
I'm Mike Bradley.
I'm Rob Whelan.
And I'm Susanna Whelan.
All right, today we have another amazing episode for y'all. We're going to be talking about some laser beams and a groundbreaking. But then we also want to talk today with our guest, Nick Touran from whatisnuclear.com. So, Nick, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, good. So, guys, why don't we just dive right into the news? We have some laser beams that we want to talk about.
Yeah, so this one is near and dear to our hearts here at Nukes of Hazard. So actually, episode 1, we interviewed Stephen Long, who's the CEO of Global Laser Enrichment in Wilmington, North Carolina. When I actually met up with Steve last summer, they were building out their test facility in Wilmington, and now they have successfully tested their laser. So a little background on that. Global Laser Enrichment is a spin out from General Electric, and the company is called Global Nuclear Fuels. And they saw an opportunity to focus in on this laser enrichment technology. So they take uranium in its state, found out in the wild, it's uranium-238. You have to remove a few ions. And the way to do that, well, there's a couple ways to do it. They're using a laser. And this is a more efficient way. And, according to them, it's not been tested before until now. So pretty exciting. Congrats to the GLE team. And their facility will be in Paducah, Kentucky, which is becoming sort of like a uranium enrichment center. There's a couple other firms who are looking at doing that. So
who knew? In Paducah, Kentucky.
Yeah.
Seems like they're giving a lot of incentives for nuclear stuff. And it from a different article I read, there's another facility, General Matters, that's coming on adjacent to that, and it's on the former property of where a nuclear facility had been shut down by Obama. And it's they are the people there, their grandparents had worked at those facilities, so they were very pro nuclear.
Cool.
Yeah, those sorry to just jump in. There's a rich World War II history at Paducah where a lot of the enrichment for World War II was done at a massive facility in that area, and there's still all this uranium, depleted uranium in these massive canisters. It's just piled up in this massive, like, endless parking lot out there. And so there's this big sort of historical legacy in that area.
Interesting background.
Okay, so speaking of history, Nick, so the reason we don't enrich uranium in the United States much is because of some decisions, I think, in the 70s, 80s. I think it was Jimmy Carter, that administration, and actually Reagan too, if I'm not mistaken. But basically, we don't know how to do it in the United States, really. So we're starting to try to do it now. I'll put you on the hot seat, Nick. Do you know much about the laser technology here? Like, how does that actually work?
Yeah,
why are we using?
Yeah, I know the basic principle. So, like, you've got your most of the stuff you dig up is uranium-238, as you mentioned, and then there's a little tiny bit, less than 1%, that's uranium-235, and you want to concentrate that one. And lasers are able to actually be tuned so finely that if you shoot the laser at sort of a gas of this natural uranium, you can get it so that it only ionizes one isotope but not the other. And this requires extremely careful, control of the frequency of the laser. And so what they can do is just get it to only ionize the uranium-235, and then once it's ionized, it's kicked off an electron. Then you just put it in a magnetic field, and only the uranium-235 gets pulled away by a magnet now that it's ionized. And so you can concentrate the uranium-235 through that kind of a mechanism. It's very cool. I mean, that technology was demonstrated at like lab scale back in the 60s and 70s, and there have been a few attempts to scale it up to compete, to do like bulk enrichment. But so far, no one's been able to compete with the other means that we do it with, which are like spinning the atoms into a gas centrifuge. And so here we are. But there's plenty of reason to think it may be cheaper, easier, smaller. And so it's good to see.
Oh, right. Smaller. It takes up a smaller footprint, right? Like you don't have to spin around a giant thing, right? Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Instead of like in the gas centrifuges, you have to spin it in one centrifuge, but then you have to have the output of that go into the input of another one and spin it some more. And then you have to have like, again, a massive building full of these centrifuges to get it to enrich at the level needed for a reactor. And so the laser technology, because it can kind of ionize and just pull the uranium-235 right off, it can be a much smaller footprint. So that may be able to reduce costs significantly.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And we're trying to get,
That's already
for the small modular reactors, upwards of 10 to 15% enriched uranium. Is that my understanding, Nick?
Yeah, some of them go up to 20%. So they're sort of between the 5 and 20% range.
5 and
A lot of
20, right.
these smaller. Yeah, that 20% is kind of the official limit for low enriched uranium. So that's for people. There's a lot that are right at 19.75%.
We get a 19.999, baby. Once you're at 20, that's weapons grade. So it's completely different, security and all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah. Well, speaking of small modular reactors, do we want to talk about a groundbreaking?
Yeah. I thought you stuttered, but you
Actually, she's
that's
pretty
exactly
quick
what
about
you
it.
meant to
She's
say.
pretty
Sorry.
good at this.
Yeah. So Opla, this was a small modular reactor company funded in part by Sam Altman of ChatGPT. And they're actually publicly traded, and they're building their reactor is called the Aurora. And a small modular reactor, they sell them in groups. If you go on their website, aesthetically, it looks very beautiful. And in fact, Allo Atomics has a similar approach that they want this stuff to look real nice, real good. Anyway, they're breaking ground up in Idaho National Labs, to start building the Aurora reactor. Now, this is significant because there's kind of a race right now with small modular reactors to go critical, meaning turn on, by July 4th of next year. Okla's on that list. And so they're breaking ground. And you can see the team here. This is earlier this week. Another interesting point for Nukes of Hazard fans is, someone has to build it, right? Kiewit, nuclear.
Aha.
So Kiewit, we interviewed Megan from Kiewit earlier, and she said that the nuclear business was just getting up. Obviously, she's crushing it because they're building Aurora's, the Aurora up in Idaho National Labs. So pretty neat.
And could you believe she didn't tell us, Nick, who her customer was? She didn't tell Rob and I.
Amazing.
I was like, come on, Megan, just tell us who it's going to be. Yeah.
Well, congrats to Megan and Steve. Great things happening in the news. It's great to see our guests doing good things. Let's move on to our current guest, Nick. Welcome to the podcast. We're glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks again. Again, happy to be here. It's an honor.
Yeah, well, tell us what is whatisnuclear.com.
Yeah, so it's a public education website about nuclear power. It's gone through many phases. It's almost 20 years old at this point. I started with my friends when we were in undergrad at the nuclear department at University of Michigan. We thought back then, like, geez, we've learned that nuclear is so interesting and capable and promising, but people don't know that. And if you Googled nuclear back then, it sort of was a lot of negative stuff and not too exciting. So we thought, well, let's make a website that'll be easy for people to just go to and learn kind of the basic top things you need to know about nuclear to get excited about it. So that was the origination of it. And it's something that then, like, my friends got jobs and I kept working on it, nights and weekends. I got a job eventually after grad school and just limped it along. And kind of whenever I found something interesting, I would just throw it up there. And so it sort of grew with my interests and explorations. And it became, we added more public education stuff, but it also kind of built a little bit more sophisticated arm with it, sort of like InReach. It was like messaging for people in the nuclear industry or someone who already supports nuclear. It was like information for them to come and become a little bit more aware. So I did like what we might call interventions. I did one on like thorium myths. There was a lot of thorium talk in like 2010 about how thorium's going to save everything, is so much better. And I kind of listed out the top things I heard all the time about thorium that were a little bit misleading, and I put some historical, corrections on them. And then that sort of led to more like reactor history interest. I got really interested in old reactor history. It's really a fascinating, go from World War II to now, there's been this incredible amount of work done on reactor history. And I started writing up reactor history pages and economics. And then one day found like a bunch of old nuclear films and started getting those digitized and published those on the website as well. So it's kind of been all over the place, but that's the summary.
So I met Nick for the first time at the nuclear or the Regulatory Information Conference at the NRC last March, and kind of got into this this digital project. And what I've noticed about it, and that's what we're talking to Nick about today, is he's collected 50 plus videos that show old innovations. And it, like you said, Nick, from World War II, there was gobs of innovation happening, and it wasn't just on paper, right? Like they would drop, fuel rods into a tank of water to see what happens. So super exciting to hear more about that.
Yeah. And I mean, it was the smartest people in the world went into nuclear in 1955. Like, it was the industry, and there was tons of funding, and it was very much like, let's just go build and explore. And so a lot of the new stuff that we're seeing today, the companies that are raising money and doing interesting stuff today, almost all of them are basically just picking up a concept that was developed to a degree and operated even a little bit back in the 50s and 60s, and they're now bringing it back in the modern context and getting it going again. So there's really a lot of truly relevant information that's out there, and relevant experiments and various lessons about materials and so on that are like actually important for the modern efforts. When I worked at TerraPower, a lot of the stuff I found historically was like required for, I needed it because of something I was working on to build the next sodium cooled fast reactor. So I think it's both interesting as sort of a curiosity, but also very relevant and important for the modern effort, sort of pushing this next generation of reactors. There's almost no reactor that wasn't sort of tried in the 50s.
Wow.
Yeah, which is really surprising. Yeah.
And it's just public information.
It's a lot of it, not all of it, but a huge amount, almost a surprising amount, is just publicly available. Tens of thousands of pages of detailed drawings of like equipment, pumps, reactors, and pretty impressive detail is just publicly available and out there. So yeah, there's still some stuff that's classified, but on the commercial power side, really most of it's available.
Mm-hmm.
No, I just don't want to gloss over your resume. And Nick, I in preparation for this, I went through your LinkedIn, and you did some pretty cool stuff. And you were at TerraPower pretty darn early, and you were at INL, back before all of this SMR stuff got off the ground. So you left Michigan and then went to you interned at INL, and then did you head right to TerraPower? I can't remember.
Yeah, so TerraPower, I went out as a consultant when I was a grad student. They needed people who could model their type of reactor, which is pretty exotic, and only like a few people in the country were weird enough to know how to model that kind of reactor, and I happened to just have gotten interested in it. And so they called my research group, and I came out as a consultant in like 2008. And then after we had that relationship, I went out as an intern the next summer, and then I never left. I went on full time before finishing my PhD, and they actually funded my PhD research for the next 3 years until I actually finished. Turned out my PhD research was like, make a reactor good, and they wanted a good reactor. So it was like very much, it was well aligned. So that was very nice. It was a good deal.
Yeah. That's cool. So, all right. So you mentioned earlier, like when you first started, what is nuclear? It kind of became an internal industry. Like, ooh, let's address some topics that are brewing in the industry. You had a sophisticated audience. Just so happens our audience is exceedingly sophisticated, so we can go there too. I want to ask like a thematic question, then we can dig into some of these videos. So you mentioned there was like a great deal of innovation and work happening. And actually some of the technology that's covered in the videos is being like, I don't know, resuscitated today. So, do you see a similar amount of energy in terms of the creativity and innovation happening today? Number one. And number two, what kind of technology has resurfaced that you think has promise?
Yeah, I would say it's humbling to watch the films. I would say we are basically nowhere near the level of development that we were in the 50s and 60s on innovative new nuclear. I mean, there were companies. I mean, we did the nuclear powered aircraft project was a 10-year project, from late 1940s to about 1960, and it had probably there must have been like 8,000 people working on it. We spent like over like $10 billion, like in today's money on that project. And I mean, they had facilities with like maybe 500 scientists running white hot lithium metal through, at 100 miles per hour through these tubes, stuff that like we aren't even dreaming of. They were doing back then at a scale that we just like can't imagine. There were so many reactors up and running. They could just run down to the reactor down the street and do a test or build a new reactor and test a different type of material. And so we just have lost a lot of that capability. We're regaining it. Like right now, there's a ton of progress rebuilding that capability. A lot of the companies are building liquid metal test loops again and regaining that plumbing experience that's so hard to sort of write down. It's really a hands-on challenge that has to be like learned hands-on. So we're headed in the right direction, but we're like still nowhere near what we had at that time. So we lost a lot, and I'm happy to see us rebuilding it.
Cool.
And then in terms of technologies that are coming back, I mean, it's every one of those films that got digitized. I'm like, oh, I hope there's like someone makes a startup about this one. And it's kind of happened a few times. Like, I really got into this. There was a reactor in Nebraska called Hallam that was a sodium liquid metal cooled with graphite moderator, so that slowed the neutrons down. It's a really weird kind of reactor called a sodium graphite reactor. Now, ALO is like basically that kind of reactor. Like that's effectively what they're doing, which is really fun. And then there's other ones that were like homogeneous aqueous reactors, and there's a startup doing those now. And so it's what are they called? Cal Thermo is doing like small versions of those for isotope production. So, and then I've just heard that there may be a new startup coming out doing the organic coolant, which is like using organic fluids like an oil as the coolant instead of water. And so the people are starting to get interested in that again. And so it's really, I mean, every one of the films, there's like a company now associated with that effort. Liquid metal, molten salt, high temperature gas, they're all kind of in there, and they're all coming back.
Yeah, I mean, these videos are so quaint. Everything from the theme music that they start, that amazing narrator voice that throughout. I encourage all of our listeners to check some of these out. That they're just beautifully produced. Do you see themes that you would encourage people to even go and think about if they're thinking about innovation in nuclear, things that we haven't been addressing in the field in the last 10-20 years?
Yeah, I think there's like a systematic nature to the way they were doing development back then that I really respect, which is that I think we could do better at today, where they kind of said, hey, we think this is a good reactor concept, and we're going to go build a small version of it, and we're going to experiment with it, and we're going to see how it works. We're going to see if we can get it to run well. We can see if we can maintain it effectively. We can see if it has a good uptime. And if so, then maybe we'll turn it into a product. And I really like that. It's a little bit different from what we're doing today, where people are saying, we think we have a good reactor idea, and we're selling them to data centers right now without ever having turned it on, or ever even handled anything radioactive or any high temperature fluid or anything. So there's sort of I know that kind of goes well with the venture capital world of today's. You got to kind of have that real excitement. Whereas when it was a government sponsored R&D program, it was more sort of scientifically appropriate in terms of like, we think it's good, let's find out. That's just one thing that I think could be a little bit better, because I do think if you sort of are rushing to power data centers, you may have to take shortcuts that make the engineering more challenging, that would actually make reaching that goal harder. So I think if we could sort of get a few of these, maybe be more collaborative and having a couple companies work together, if they have a shared type of technology, maybe they can build a test facility that they all put money into and they all kind of learn from, in terms of, again, how to set up instruments and pumps and all the basic stuff about running these more exotic types of reactors. And then based on all learning that, then go off and have competition in the products going out.
You heard it here first. That's the great idea.
Yeah, it's pretty competitive for sure. I've kind of a dumb question. So like I said, there's this race to go critical by next July 4th. So
Yeah.
why, I think it's going to be hard, but why would that be? If it is hard, why is it harder today than it was in, say, the 1950s, 60s? Like all those experiments you mentioned, I don't know, did they just kind of whip them together and they had something running?
Because they had so many thousands of engineers who are experienced in building reactors, they didn't just whip them together. I mean, they could pound out a hazard summary that was pretty well done by throwing 500 engineers at it, and they could put out a safety analysis in maybe 6 months. And then, I mean, they weren't building like high power reactors that fast back then. They may have taken 3 or 4 years to build some of these exotic reactors. And so to go critical in a few months, even they wouldn't have been able to do that in a way that would be like meaningful or helpful. Like anybody can take some enriched fuel and assemble it together and bring it critical. Like that's easy. And I think that's what people, in order to meet this 12-month thing, like that's what's going to happen. You're going to take some fuel, you're going to set it together, you're going to pull the rods out and say like, okay, it goes critical, but it's not going to come to power, like high power. It's not going to be cost effective. It's not going to be reliable or operable or maintainable or anything like that. So, I mean, I think we have spent too much time just studying paper reactors. And so I do appreciate the race to criticality. I think it's important to get hands-on with real neutrons. And so I don't hate that we're doing this, but I do think it's not like the most appropriate way to reach a well-running, well-engineered system. You can't do real engineering on that type of a time scale. Even if you had the hundreds of engineers that we had back then, it still takes, there's still like real engineering that has to happen.
The end product of this year will be a bit of a show, and then they'll have to go back and redo.
That's that is sort of what I believe. Like, I think people are going to get there. Whoever got the farthest, maybe will have more clout. I think some of them may actually be able to go critical, but, and hopefully that will lead to feedback where, they get more funding and more time to be able to focus on building like a real practical thing. I do think it's definitely more of a, it's a show to like get people excited. And hopefully it will eventually lead to well-running products.
Well,
we shouldn't expect them to just turn on and be great. Yeah.
I want my fireworks lit up by a nuclear reactor next July 4th. That's what.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be awesome. I would love that.
Yeah.
That would be very cool.
No, Nick, I went through the site, and for the viewers, not only does Nick have all the videos digitized, he has screenshots of going through, so you don't have to watch every single one, and some summaries, and it's really cool to go through it and just peruse a lot of them. My wife and I go to Puerto Rico a lot, so I read the one about the bonus reactor over on the west side of Puerto Rico, and but if we were going to actually sit down and watch a couple, do you have any recommendations as far as like for like nerdy guys like Rob and I, or for normies like Sarah and Susanna?
Yeah. I guess I have a few favorites. Like, I think one of my favorites is definitely the nuclear ship Savannah documentary, which is like very well produced. And it really it just goes, I love the nuclear ship Savannah. Nuclear powered ships are super interesting and cool. And like that film just turned out so nice, and they really did a good job with it. And like there's kind of fun stories about digitizing it where the Savannah Association had never seen the film, and they sent me like a bunch of swag. They sent me like a this. And on the Savannah Facebook page, this lady came in. She's like, "Hey, go to like this minute. Like that's me as a kid, and like my dad was the producer of this film." And she like had all these other pictures of when they were making the film. It was just so cool. Like that just that came together really well. I put some of her pictures on the page for that one. So that's a fun one. For the on the more, techno interest side, in that same batch, there was one called the PM1 nuclear power plant, which was this little military microreactor that was built on a mountain in Wyoming. And it's interesting because it's like it is a true microreactor. It was built in a factory. It was shipped to site in airplanes. Like it was first assembled and tested at the factory. Then they broke it up into like 16 packages and flew it in C-130s to Wyoming, and then just trucked it up this mountain and slapped it back together and turned it on. And it's very interesting because it's really close to what people are talking about today. Like that's the microreactor story of today. And some of the lessons learned that are discussed in there, and in some of the documentation I found after posting that is really like important and interesting for like designers of new plants. So that one's cool. Sorry, I have to the bonus one was fun. I mean, I love them all. Oh, the one about there was a nuclear reactor that we flew in an airplane as part of this nuclear powered bomber program, which is really just weird and exotic, and it's kind of crazy to see. It didn't power the plane, but we turned it on and flew it around in a conventionally powered plane to study how much radiation would be shooting out of it. So that one was really interesting. Yeah, there's one, maybe like the biggest picture one that I think is cool was the one on agro-industrial complexes, which is more of a concept. It's like mostly animated, but they were talking about basically building nuclear plants in desert areas around the world with like huge desalination plants, and then using the desalination plant to turn the desert area into this like massive industrial farm. And then they would bring in they had like aluminum plants and all this other equipment. Like they kind of, the idea was to take unusable land and turn it into these like lush industrial ecosystems with 300,000 people living and working there. And it would make enough food for like millions of people and billions of gallons of fresh water from the sea per day. It's just very it's just such a big idea. And this is something that JFK was pushing for. It was actually they thought it would bring peace to the Middle East because everyone's fighting over Israel because it's the only fertile land. So let's just make the whole Middle East,
The whole thing fertile.
totally fertile. And there you go. There's plenty of land for everybody. So no one will fight. Of course, I'm sure it's more complicated than that, but that was kind of a serious proposal back in the early 60s.
Oh, that's super fascinating.
Yeah. So those are a few highlights, I guess.
Has the Library of Congress reached out to you to because you're taking historical information, digitizing it and cataloging it, and some of it is historically relevant. I don't know. Do they do that for websites? That's no, seriously, because they have random things at the Library of Congress, like comedies, Blazing Saddles and stuff like that. I mean, so something like this that has historical relevance in an area of science that is important. I don't know.
Which entrepreneur, if he can get his jokes cataloged in the library?
Yeah.
That's kind of what he's going after. Which is fair.
Not this episode, but the What is Nuclear definitely deserves it.
Yeah, it's almost the opposite, because these films, I discovered all these films they're in the National Archives. The 60mm reels are sitting in the National Archives, and that's when I was looking for one in particular, and I was scouring the internet, and I found one little index page on the National Archives that was just the title. And it was well, if you want to get this digitized, here's how. You got to do this paperwork and you got to pay this money, and we will work with the official contractor who's, qualified to handle National Archives material and get it, and they can digitize and send me the hard drive. And that's what happened. I ran that whole process, and this incredible, beautiful film came back, and I was like, holy cow, let's do more. And they sort of, it's a few $100. I mean, for a 4K scan of a 30-minute film can be $800 or something like that, and that's just what the scanning costs. So I self-funded the first one. I put it up there, and all these people on LinkedIn were like, hey, can I do one? And so I started cataloging them and ranking them in order, and random people came out of the woodwork, and they were like, I want to sponsor this one or that one.
Cool.
And so they are in the National Archives. They're not digitized. They have a process to digitize them sort of on demand. As the world deems them interesting, they will facilitate the digitization for money. So I don't know. They're kind of they're being good stewards. The films that we've gotten out of the National Archives have generally been in good shape. There's a few, actually some of the more recent ones that are on video cassettes instead of 60 millimeter are degrading. There were a few that they like couldn't extract. They're like, sorry, the tape is like broken. So there's some urgency in getting the rest of them digitized, but no, the Library of Congress hasn't reached out yet.
It's just fascinating to me that what you're finding in these films is that some of these ideas are getting resuscitated, for lack of a better phrase. I mean, that shows the power of, like, the lasting power of this idea around using uranium for energy. There's just many ways to tackle it. And now that we're trying to commercialize some of it, it's just super exciting.
I just think about what would have happened if we would have just kept with it, So,
Yeah, I mean, there's a film from 1957, The Need for Non-Fossil Fuel Electricity Sources. I mean, like
1957.
1957. It's incredible that some things just are still there.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot of good ideas out there. I mean, there's like millions of different types of nuclear reactors, by having different fuels with different coolants and moderators and power cycles. There's like a couple million different combinations. And like a few of the favorites that were tried, very few of the people who are working on these types of reactors said, like, that's it, this reactor idea is bad, we shouldn't do this anymore. What usually happened is they said, we can fix it, this is awesome, but it's not quite working perfectly. We need a little bit more time, a little bit more money to get it through. But the sponsor or the utility partner was like, we don't want it. Like, it's too hard for us. We don't want to like deal with that thing breaks too often. We're going to use a water cooled reactor like everyone else because those are running really well. We don't want the kind that breaks all the time. So there's this graveyard of reactors that like probably could have worked maybe even better than a water cooled reactor, but never worked well enough to like get over that hump. And so what we're seeing now is that people are digging those back up and they're saying like, no, we believe it's going to get over that hump. We've got the investor money. We're going to build the reactor and we're going to like make sure it actually can operate better than a water cooled reactor. So it really is just like digging up out of these, because back then they like knew like it should be a good idea, and that logic is still perfectly valid. And so that's kind of what's inspiring this investment now.
Yeah. Well, from a regulatory perspective, I'll just say this. I mean, I would not want to be at the NRC with seeing all these different technologies come through, because they have seen one and they've gotten great at one technology, but man, hey, Nick.com is now doing a sodium cooled flying reactor. It can work. What do y'all think? I mean, there's just so many different things to consider. That's kind of the other side of it. Another hurdle that a lot of these newer companies will have to get over. And the NRC is making pathways for alternative reactors for sure.
Yeah, that's definitely that's a legit issue, and it is sort of one, like, some people say like, hey, if you want to build nuclear, like, just choose one good enough reactor technology and everybody focus on it and build a bunch of them, like France did or like Japan did, and like that's a proven good way to do it. And like I kind of am on board with that plan, and that should be like, I think that should be like 75 or 80% of the industry's effort, and then still develop the potentially more capable reactors that are risky. Spend some time on that, but that shouldn't be like the highlight. Right now, it kind of feels like most people are banking on these sort of unproven, untested, not yet reliable reactors to kind of come in and swoop the sort of proven workhorse reactors. So, yeah, there's an argument to be made there, but like in any case, like people working on any kind of reactor is the first order thing that is good. So can't complain.
For just a novice on all these different technologies, do you have a favorite, like that since you know way more about the different as far as like, I mean, is it a water cooled moderator? Is it something else, or do you have one that you like that you'd put your money on?
I mean, I started out in fusion and I switched to advanced sodium cooled reactors, and I have to say I've gained like a much larger appreciation for water cooled, water moderated reactors than I had in the old days. Like, I used to kind of think they're old and kind of boring and not that cool, but now I think like, wow, those are actually really well optimized, impressive reactors. They're not perfect. But I would say, like, if I wanted to build a bunch of reactors right now, I would just take, because they're, we know they work. We just built 2 of them in Vogel. and they're safe enough and all that stuff. I would say like let's build 20 of those right now. Like that would be step one. And then I would say, and then in terms of the advanced reactors, I do really like, so like I'm an advisor for ALO right now. They're like sodium cooled with a moderator, which is graphite now. And I really do like that concept. And that's one of the reasons I signed up to sort of work with them a little bit, because like one of the films, which is the one from Nebraska that I got done, was that kind of reactor. And so when they showed up and they're like doing basically that kind of reactor, I'm like, ooh, this is a really good idea. It combines, it's pretty low cost fuel. It doesn't need HALEU. You can run on lower enriched uranium because it has this thing called a moderator that slows the neutrons down. But then it also has all the advantages of the liquid metal sodium, which is a really great coolant. So that's one of my favorite concepts. It's so that's the one that I've been working on just a little bit. But overall, like the water cooled reactor, I think is totally underappreciated and should be like the focus of the industry until a higher performance reactor is truly proven and prototyped and up and running.
That's awesome.
Well, fascinating discussion, Nick. Thanks for bringing the history of nuclear, which is like still current. It sounds like in so many ways. Really appreciate your perspective. Whatisnuclear.com. Everybody go check it out. There's some really fantastic films there. So, Nick, thanks for joining us today on Nukes of Hazard.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Of course, thanks for having me on. It was fun.
Yeah. Thanks to our listeners too. Bye-bye.